Hello, hello. Welcome to Naturopathic Beekeeping. So welcome to those of you who are joining me live. Also, big welcome to anybody who's catching this on replay. So if you're on Facebook, just make sure that you allow Facebook to share your name. So you would be asked to give permission to StreamYard. So StreamYard is what I'm using here. And do comment. So let me know that you're here so I know who's watching and whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, and I should be able to see the comments as we go. So I'm going to give you a bit of housekeeping so that when we get going, I can keep up to date with what everybody's saying, but I'll mainly answer any questions at the end. So welcome to this. So here we are, Naturopathic Beekeeping, beautiful day, lovely hot day for being in a bee suit, but what a relief that it has been sunny enough to be in a bee suit at all and to be checking the bees. So I'm really pleased about that. So welcome to those of you on YouTube, welcome to those of you on Facebook. Thank you for joining me. I'm really pleased, and I'm going to be announcing the winners of the Beekeeping Challenge. So you just have to hang on, and then I will share who the winners are. And the winners can win a place on either my Naturopathic Beekeeping course or the skep making course or a book bundle. So I've got 3 prizes to give away. I'm sorry that there's going to be some disappointed people, and I just loved what you were all doing on Instagram. So thank you so much for taking part in the challenge and putting in your answers. It's really great to see what you're all doing to help save the bees. So welcome to Naturopathic Beekeeping. So I'm going to talk all about Naturopathic Beekeeping, why I do it, why it's special, why you should be doing it, and who else is doing it as well. So it's not just me. I'm not just a lone naturopathic beekeeper. There's quite a movement all around the world. So on every webinar I have, there's a certain percentage of people that really want to go deeper onto whatever topic I'm talking about, whether it's honey or naturopathic beekeeping or bees. So, that's fine, and you can get personalized help. So what I've been doing, and particularly over the last year, is developing some online courses so that people can have access to me and trying to make the information I have more available. So over the coming months, there's going to be more downloadables, more places to find out, or where I can share what I'm doing with bees and honey at the moment. So what I'm going to do at the end is I'm going to tell you about a rare opportunity. I have come up with a really special treat for those of you who are joining me today or catching it on the replay. And you'll have the opportunity to be part of my online course on naturopathic beekeeping. So I normally only run the course through the winter months because that's when I'm not busy with bees. And I've had so many people ask to join the course this summer. And I know that now is the time that people are thinking about bees. So I have come up with a special treat for those of you that want to do it, and a special price, because it's not quite as interactive as the ones I have done in the past, but it's just right for now. And you'll still have all my wisdom on naturopathic beekeeping and the opportunity to do the course at your own pace. So it is online, so you can attend anywhere in the world as long as you have got internet. And there's lots of downloadables and there's quizzes. So it's really good fun to do. So it might be what you're looking for right now or another time, but whatever, it doesn't matter. So I run the courses through the winter, but I'm doing this special one through end of June, July, just so that you can have the opportunity to do the beekeeping. So if it's not right for you now, doesn't matter, but you know where to find me when you're ready. It's normally done through the winter months because then you can be prepared and you can have everything in place ready for the bee season. But this year, the bee season's been a bit odd. It's a bit slow. It's a bit hit and miss as we go. So there's never really a bad time to start thinking about bees and to get yourself organized and have everything in place. So you can use what you've learned on my free challenges and webinars. So I do try and give as much information away as I can, But there's nothing like working with a group of other people or having access to asking questions and having them answered. And even better if you can have one-to-one or live sessions. So through the winter months, I do the live sessions. But what I'm going to do through this summer, I will explain later on. But it gives more people an opportunity to have access to the naturopathic beekeeping sort of knowledge, the wisdom, and what the bees are telling us that they need help with. So I love this quote so much so that I'm just going to make it a bit bigger. So, those who know how to treat bees do not need to fear their sting. Now, how wise is that? Now, that's a Slovenian saying, and the Slovenians are a race of amazing beekeepers, and they actually founded the World Bee Day, which is on the 20th of May. So the original beekeeping teacher was from Slovenia, and so they have this culture of caring for the bees, working with the bees, and of course having amazing honeys. But they understand the connection between the soil, the land, the flowers, and the bees and people, and it's that connection that naturopathic beekeeping is all about. So just consider, those who know how to treat their bees do not need to fear their sting. So many people ask me, how often do you get stung? Do bees sting you a lot? Well, follow me now and on this journey, and I'll explain all about the stinging and about what you need to be fearful of, which may not be what you thought. So I'm Paula Carnell, and I am a naturopathic beekeeper. So I believe the bees are the key to saving of the planet. And we often hear that when the bees die, we've got 4 years left. But that's very often interpreted as if when the bees die, we haven't got anyone left to pollinate our food or anything left to pollinate our food. But I see it slightly differently. The more I work with bees, I see that what is killing the bees is also killing us. And so in actual fact, we need to learn from the bees. We need to watch what they're doing and have a much better understanding of how we can learn from the bees and not only save the bees, but save ourselves. So, but we think, oh, I want to save the bees. Let me get a beehive. But is keeping bees really the best way to save them and us? So what do? I'm a naturopathic beekeeper, so I'm quite often up ladders with bees in trees. I'm watching bees, but I'm basically working in alignment with nature. That is the key about naturopathy. It's using nature's power of healing and curing and just retaining the balance. So naturopathic beekeeping is all about understanding the natural cycles of life, the natural cycles of beekeeping. So comment here if you are a beekeeper. So just put your name, say hello, comment in there so I know how many beekeepers are actually watching this. And if you're a naturopathic beekeeper, then also tell me you're a naturopathic beekeeper. So you may be wondering, what's the difference? Well, I'll tell you shortly. So here's my bee team. This is who I work with. We have clients all over the place, and one of them, which you may be familiar with, is the Newt in Somerset. So this is my team. So we have Randy in the blue, Kerry in the white, Linda in the pink, and Joe in the white, again with the white jacket. And Joe's been beekeeping for over 45 years now. And between us, we've probably got about 80 years worth of beekeeping experience. So it's amazing what we've all picked up, and we all have our own specialities, but together we work as a really good team, and we take care of bees for ourselves and for other people. So I'd like you to add your questions or any insights or comments as we go, and I will answer them at the end. So do put some comments in, say hello, tell me you're here, put them all in so I know who's here. And do tell me, are you a beekeeper? Is there a big question that you've always wanted to know about bees? Just type it here, and at the end, I will have a look. So going back to, is beekeeping really the best thing we can do for bees? Peter Neumann, who's the president of Colos, which is the colony loss group who study bees and beekeeping all around the world and what is killing the bees. And he's also the professor at Bern University. He says the biggest risk to bees is beekeepers. Now, that probably shocks you. It would probably shock you if you're a beekeeper. But the more I got to learn about beekeeping, the more I realized that it probably wasn't the best thing for bees. So it was quite a relief to me to realize I wasn't alone in this belief, and that some of the biggest names in bees and beekeeping and bee wisdom are also starting to see that a lot of the things that have been practiced in beekeeping for a number of years are not actually helping the bees. So I'm not saying that beekeepers don't all love their bees. They do, but we can get into habits, we can get into practices that perhaps over time are not the best thing to do. So for instance, if you put chemicals inside a hive to kill a mite, if one single mite survives, you've now developed a chemical resistant mite. You know, they adapt, their life cycles are so quick, so fast. So they're changing quicker than we can adapt. So it's things like that that we need to consider. If something doesn't work once, why do we keep doing it? If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're not going to get different results. And so this is where naturopathic beekeeping is much more flexible and observant about the effects of what we're doing. So is beekeeping helping the insects that we all love so much? Well, I think in a way, when you start keeping bees, you start to care about bees, and then you start to notice other bees, and you start to look at the plants, and you look at other insects and butterflies and bugs and beetles and spiders and wasps and worms, and it just expands, and you start to care a lot more about the insects. Now, even beekeepers who are very intensive, they care about their bees, because if they lose their bees, they won't get any honey. But it's getting that balance and that sustainability and finding at what point are you exploiting the bees and at what point are you working in harmony with them. So why do I keep bees? Well, I used to be an artist. I had 20 odd years painting away. I used to paint big flowers, botanical paintings. I exhibited all over the world. And in the back of my mind, I'd always thought, oh, one day it would be really nice to keep bees. But it wasn't a sort of a change in career that I planned. What happened when I got to 40 years old, I just suddenly collapsed with a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And I became bed and wheelchair bound for 7 years. So during that time, I wasn't able to paint at all. I wasn't able to do much. I really was laying flat on my back and just having to meditate, really, for a lot of the time. That was all I could do. And so my husband bought me a beehive so that I could look out the window from my bedroom and actually watch the bees. And my inspiration for bees was, like many people, it was Winnie the Pooh. It was honey. Everybody loves honey. But also, I'm a Dorset girl. And so I had read a lot of Thomas Hardy, partly out of pleasure and partly due to schooling. But Bathsheba Everdeen in Far From the Madding Crowd was one of my female heroes or heroines. I just loved how she was a survivor, and she was really strong and independent, but also had quite a few romances in there. But there was this scene in the film with Julie Christie of Far From the Madding Crowd, where she's wearing beautiful linen white dress and a lovely romantic veil, and she climbs up a ladder and captures a swarm in a skep. And I remember just thinking, oh gosh, that looks like what a woman should be doing. And I just loved everything about it. So when I started beekeeping, that's how I was picturing myself. I was thinking, oh yes, I'm just going to be this strong woman. So I was very lucky with my illness, because over time, after 6 years, I got the diagnosis of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and then I became a patient of a medical herbalist. And within 8 months, she got me out of the wheelchair and walking again, but with sticks. And then shortly after that, my mum had introduced me to some plant-based minerals, and I started taking them. And within 2 weeks, I didn't need the sticks. And within 4 months, I was walking the Dorset coast, having not walked barely at all for 7 years. So that is when my life started to change. I became so grateful that I was alive, and it was really thinking about the bees that changed everything. So the herbs and the minerals were all part of that. But now what I find is the bees bring it all together. So my first hive was a WBC, and that's me on my birthday with my hive in November. And I was just waiting for these bees to come. So that's about 10 years ago now. And I was so excited. But as I was keeping bees, and I had a mentor who did all the caring for me, and when I was able, I would get out of bed and I would just stand by the hive and help where I could. I started to learn about beekeeping, and a lot of the practices that were just accepted and normal that everyone was doing, from my perspective as somebody who'd been very ill, I was looking with new eyes and starting to question things and think, well, that doesn't look so good. Or do you think perhaps that might be what's making the bees so sick? And we all hear about how sick the bees are. So there are all kinds of benefits of beekeeping. Of course, there's the honey. You have the health and well-being, which is not just about the honey or using products from the hive, but it's the fact that when you're working with bees or caring for bees, you're outside more and you tend to be calmer and more relaxed. So you're out there with nature, and to avoid being stung, you need to be calm and relaxed. There's also conservation and pollination. So you start to keep the flowers for the other pollinators. So here we have some hoverflies on some daisies, things that perhaps before you start beekeeping, all bees look the same. But the more you start to work with bees, you start to identify the different species. And in the world, there's 22,000 species of bees. 11 of them are honeybees. Here in the UK, we have 270 species of bees and only one honeybee. But there are so many varieties, and I love running bee safaris at the Newt, where I can walk around the gardens and I can show people the different species of bees we have and the intricate connection between different plants and bees and how the plants communicate with the bees. That's another story, but it's just so fascinating. And that is a benefit of beekeeping because it just helps your well-being. You start to understand how nature fits and how connected everything is, and therefore where our place is in that connection. It's so important. And pollination is really important. I've loved the fact that when you have bees in an environment, so perhaps in an orchard, scientists have found that you have more blossoms. It's like the flowers bloom more. They cry out. They go, yes, we've got bees. So they express their joy more. So more bees brings more flowers, and more flowers brings more bees. So it's a wonderful connection, and that's one of the main benefits of beekeeping. So what is the difference between conventional beekeeping and a more natural way, or naturopathic? So conventional beekeeping tends to be all about the honey. It's about how much honey do you get, how much honey can you get, and that seems to be what it's about. When you meet beekeepers, they say, how much honey have you got? How much did you get last year? How big was your crop? And to me, it wasn't all about the honey. And where I'm really excited is more and more people are coming to me saying, it's not about the honey for me. I just feel drawn. I just feel I need to help the bees. So with conventional beekeeping, you can do all the courses, which I do recommend you do the courses. However, there's a big emphasis on the treatments, queen wing clipping, drone culling. It's very much about high management and control of bees. And perhaps there's not as much thought about looking at how the bees will control and manage themselves if humans weren't interfering. So the treatments will be used as preventative treatments for diseases, but also as treatments once bees are sick with diseases. But now there's more and more science that's showing what is happening as an effect of these treatments. So there is always an effect. The moment you use anything that isn't natural, there will be a consequence. And what we're seeing is the consequence of a lot of our agriculture, but also our beekeeping practice on bees. So it is about disease prevention and cure. And it is important to understand about diseases, because if you have bees in your garden, whether you're keeping them naturally or in a more conventional way, you need to understand when they're sick. You need to take care of them, just like you would with your own family. You need to be able to see the signs of illness and then be able to connect that with what you could be doing to either prevent that or help get it better. So also the habitat. So with conventional beekeeping, it can be very much about mass production, mass habitation. The hives are produced purely for honey production. So they're more for the human's benefit than the actual bee benefit. And I'm going to talk about that in a bit. So with natural or naturopathic beekeeping, it's not just about the honey. It can be treatment free. So you can be caring for your bees using what they use naturally. So you can have things like bee gyms, which encourage the bees to do their natural behavior of grooming. And if they're grooming, they can be cleaning themselves and removing mites and pests. So there's things that you can do, and also understanding about the life cycle. I actually learned that if bees have their honey left for them in the hive, when they go into the autumn months, they can actually rest and relax, and they have time to practice their grooming. So this is really important. But if you take all the honey at the end of the summer or even midsummer, the bees are left with a panic. They know they've got to fill up their stores again to keep them through the winter. So even if you put sugar in, you have got to think that that's not nutritious, and the bees aren't stupid. They know that white sugar is not going to be the kind of nutritious food they need to get them through a long, dark winter. So it is understanding how the bees live, how they work in the wild, and how we can cooperate and support those kind of behaviours. So it's a lot more about observation rather than intervention. So it's really watching from the outside of the hive and understanding from what the behaviour you're seeing indicates is going on inside the hive. And it's amazing how much you can learn just from watching. And it's all about prevention rather than cure. So it's making sure that your bees have a really strong immune system so that they're not even going to get sick. So it's understanding what it is they need to support their own immune system, so you don't need to resort to heavy duty chemicals to try and make them better again. I love this quote from Heidi Herman, who's the chair of the Natural Beekeeping Trust. She says, "We don't want a farmer with 1 million hives, but 1 million people with one hive." And that goes back to the tradition of people having their own little space where they'd grow enough food for themselves or their families, and they'd have their own beehive. And having your own beehive would provide you with just enough honey for a sweet treat through the year. And also it would pollinate your vegetables and your fruit that you had in your little plot of land. But also it connects you with nature. You understand the cycles of nature. You get to understand and appreciate the weather, and you have a new connection with insects and animals in your environment. So I think that's the point, rather than one person that has 1 million hives that has to work so hard to try and keep them all healthy and strong. And more often than not, if you've got that many hives, it is all about the honey. So what are some of the stressful beekeeping practices? Over manipulation. You would be taught to open up a hive every week through the summer months. Now, you should never open a hive if it's not warm enough, because chilling the colony can be so damaging. You can chill the brood, which means that they'll have to remove all the brood and they won't have enough new young coming through. It could just disturb the balance. And one of the things that's really important is every time you open up a hive, you're breaking the seal, the propolis seal. And propolis is a really important product that the bees collect from trees, and they use it, they mix it with wax and they use it to line the inside of their hives. And it protects the seal, but beekeepers don't like it because it sticks everything together. But it stops the drafts, it protects them from predators, but also it's antibacterial, antiviral, antiseptic. It's absolutely incredible, and so really, really important. So if you're over manipulating the hive, if you keep opening it up and lifting up the frames to have a look, you're just putting the bees under stress. And I did read once that it takes 10 days for a colony to rebalance after one opening. So it is really being sure that you're not just opening it just to have a look. You're opening it because you have a serious reason to open the hive. They do not need disturbing. Just like we wouldn't like the roof of our house being lifted off every week and then being prodded about to see what we were doing. Repeated transportation, it's very stressful for bees. And that whole pollination cycle, particularly in the United States, where the bees will be on trucks for all through the summer months, and from early on, from February, where they're transported all around the country to pollinate different foods. Now, bees have been transported since Egyptian times, where they would be moved up and down the Nile on boats. But then they were in the same hive. But every time you move a hive, there's a risk of killing some bees. You're actually banging the frames together. And also when they get to a new location, they have to reorientate themselves. They need to know, where is the food? So it's fair enough if you're bringing them straight into an orchard and they're surrounded in blossom right on their doorstep, but it's that transportation in between. And that is very, very stressful and disorientating for the bees. But also, if you're transporting them to a place that is actually very toxic, so if they're being taken to crops which have been sprayed, then you're actually putting an additional strain on the bodies of the bees, so with a toxic load. And then, of course, if you're taking all the honey, what are they going to feed on? The bees need the honey to feed themselves through the winter, but also they need honey to make wax. Bees need 8 kilos of honey to make 1 kilo of wax. And that's quite a lot of honey. And when one bee only makes 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey in its whole lifetime, you have to think that you need that volume of bees, and they need that honey. And so they also need honey that is different varieties. They self-medicate, just like we would want to spend the winter just eating one type of food. You know, a winter of either white sugar fondant or baked beans would not have us coming out into the spring as fit and healthy human beings. And then smoke. Now, smoke was one of the first things that I questioned with beekeeping. Even before I had bees, I started to wonder about smoking. I asked beekeepers, why do they use smoke? Why are you using it? And I was always told, oh, it calms the bees. So when I had my mentor, I was saying, how is it calming the bees? What do you mean it's calming the bees? And he'd say, oh, well, we puff the smoke and the bees go down into the hive. So yes, they keep away from the beekeeper, but what are they doing when they go in the hive? Well, they're filling their stomachs up with honey because they think their hive is on fire. Well, to me, that is a fight or flight response. That's not a relaxed, calming response. That's, oh my goodness, we're going to lose everything. Quick, grab what honey you can because we've got to set up home again very soon. So that's why smoking the hive every time you open it, imagine the stress these bees are in. And if they don't have time to calm down in between openings, you know, what is that doing to them? It's going to put them into a really stressed out, nervous state. The other reason people use smoke is because when a bee stings you, and it will sting you if you're opening it when it didn't want to be opened, or you're stealing honey that it didn't want to share with you, the sting releases a pheromone, and the scent of that pheromone is just like bananas. So that's why beekeepers should not eat bananas before they go near a hive. But the smoke will mask that pheromone. So again, that's great for the beekeeper, but what it's saying to the bees is, well, we've just lost a bee who stung somebody in defense, you know, trying to protect our hive, but we're oblivious that we're being attacked because of all this smoke that's meaning we have to go in and collect our honey. So it's crazy. So smoke is not what I would recommend for bees. Now, I know that there are some very aggressive bees, but the question is, why are they so aggressive? So I've been working without smoke for 10 years. And even though there has been the occasion where we thought, oh, well, we should use smoke, or we've had some very dodgy situations with bees where you've had hives that are in roofs or in buildings, in actual fact, I have found if you go in calm and if you use a lavender water spray, that normally does the trick. It is very difficult. And what is the smoke actually doing? And if you're trying to remove bees from a difficult position, you don't really want them all in the comb anyway. You want them flying out so that you can keep them away from the comb. So really question, what is it you're doing with smoke? Now in Oman, they will use some smoke for the bees, but they'll actually put herbs in there and they use a tiny amount of smoke and they will just do a puff and waft it across the front of several hives, so that the amount of smoke is far, far less than the conventional puff, 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 puff of smoke, which people get into the habit of using. And that is really showing a disconnection with your bees, an unawareness of what the bees are doing inside the hive and how you need to change your behavior for working with the bees. Because no matter how much smoke you're using, it's not going to stop them attacking you. Now, feeding sugar. This is actually tanks. I thought it was tanks of honey at a big honey producing honey farm in Canada that I visited in 2019. And I thought, oh, that's all their tanks of honey ready to go out to be bottled or taken to wherever. In actual fact, these were just a few of the tanks left at the end of their autumn season after feeding their bees. And these are tanks of sugar. So this is all liquid sugar that they feed the bees. Now, because the bees are mainly used for pollinating there, they are feeding the bees throughout the year. And when bees are taken to crops, so for instance, apples, there's not an awful lot of nectar that bees can get from apples. So they don't come away after pollinating orchards with a lot of honey. So what you'd need to do to build the bees up ready for the next pollination job is you have to feed them sugar. So it's quite shocking when you see just how much sugar is being fed to bees. And it's something that we just can't imagine. And I hear through local bee groups as well, where sugar is just being used throughout the year. And maybe if you're feeding them sugar to build some wax because we've had some bad weather, perhaps that's acceptable. But feeding them sugar all year when they could be having honey, maybe you should be thinking about what you're growing in your environment, or talking to local farmers to make sure that they're providing things for your bees rather than you having to feed them something like sugar. Chemical treatments. There are so many chemical treatments. It's big business for bees. Chemical treatments to prevent disease, chemical treatments once they have disease. And yeah, it is a big business and a very sad business, and it's had some really serious consequences. The amount of people who are accepting as normal when they put a treatment in their hive that then there's a whole pile of dead bees. And you think, well, doesn't that tell you something? And the colony, it's 50,000 strong for a reason. It's not 50,000 strong so that we can go in and wipe out several hundred of them with a chemical treatment. So, really think about who is really benefiting from these chemical treatments. And if there's a skull and crossbones on the packet, and if you wouldn't eat it or feed it, to your children, then why would you give it to insects, wild animals? Bees are wild animals. So the real telltale sign of the effects of chemicals on hives is drones. And I've been witnessing this around this area with the effects of the survival of splits and swarms when you have a virgin queen. So a virgin queen leaves the hive and she has to mate with the drones, and she mates with between 15 and 48 drones. And what I witnessed for the first time last year was this failure for new queens to thrive. And I use natural queens. They're all reared from our own colonies. They're all from this environment. I don't buy in queens or anything like that. And so the queens are going off to these drone congregation sites. They're mating with the local drones. And then we'll find they'll come back to the hive. They'll be laying eggs. And you think, great, everything's wonderful. But 4 or 5 weeks in, you find that the colony is re-queening again. They're producing more queen cells because the queen was not well fertilized. The queen is still fine. She's running around happy as anything. But the drones she mated with have been affected by the drugs used in the hives. So it's now been shown in, even for years, this evidence has been coming out that the sperm of the drones is becoming infertile. It's unviable. And that can be due to certain chemicals that are used in the treatments. So even thymol, which you think of as a natural thyme oil, it's a herb, it's an essential oil. You think surely this must be natural enough and not doing any harm to the bees. But the bees have spent 150 million years getting the balance inside their hive just right. The pheromones, the essential oils, the balance of good and bad bacteria is so fine. And you then put in another essential oil, which is really powerful. It can then affect the fertility. So they found in 1999, so this is years ago, why are we still using this stuff? They found that thymol, formic and oxalic acid, it reduced the drone production and their survival. They also found that many of the drones were disappearing prior to maturity. So they're being, they're growing in the hive, the eggs are being laid, they're developing, but then they leave the hive and don't come back again. And this is not good news. So this alone is good enough reason to think we have to find another way. We have to look at more natural ways of keeping bees. And I'm very pleased with this picture because you can see the size of the drone. So the big chap flying with his legs hanging down and his lovely big eyes. And this week I've been watching drones coming and going from hives, ready. They're so ready to find some new queens. But this year has been so difficult, and all the rain and the cold, it's really delayed everything. So there's a lot of drones who are ready for their mating. And so, yeah, let's hope that this year they have more success. So I'm not saying we should be going back to honey hunting and climbing off trees and catching the wild bees like these people do in India and in Nepal, where you have the wild bees hanging off cliff sides and buildings and trees. And there are still honey hunters all around the world, and that's great, but that's not what I'm talking about here. And many of them are sustainable and they work in a way in alignment with nature anyway. A lot of these indigenous peoples and local communities, they have a system and a rhythm and a way of collecting honey, but we've become greedy, and that's the problem. So how do we keep bees sustainably without smoke, without sugar, and without chemicals? So here's my hero, Tom Seeley. I'm afraid it's a bit of a out of focus selfie, but I was very, very pleased to finally meet him and have a chat. But he is one of the greatest scientists who's been studying bees in the wild and managed since the early 1970s. And he's from North America. And he has an amazing forest that he has access to with Cornell University. And it's called the Arnott Forest, which is inhabited with wild colonies of bees in trees. So the studies he has done on bees, on those wild bees, is just groundbreaking and so informative on how bees completely left and not interfered with by either neighbouring commercial colonies or with humans interacting with them, how they can really survive well. And he says that swarms and drones and the mating are indicators of the fitness of a colony. So swarming is the natural thing. It's what a colony does when it's strong, as well as the mating. And if the mating isn't successful, there's something going wrong. Now, he promotes a form of Darwinian beekeeping. So that tells us that everything that colonies do when they are living on their own is done to favour their survival and reproduction. So just let that sink in for a moment. The bees are not trying to kill themselves. Everything they do is for the good of the species' survival. It's not for the good of producing honey for humans. It's for the ability for them to reproduce and survive. This is really, really important. And bees have been around for 150 million years. So they really are, they've had plenty of time to try and figure out what works and what doesn't work. And we've been spending the last 50 or 60 years doing our best to damage all that wisdom. So what are the good and less stressful beekeeping practices? Well, different types of hive types. So here I've got a bait hive. It's a golden bait hive that we hang in a tree to attract swarms. And swarming, as Tom Seeley says, it is an indication of how healthy the bees are. So here's a little short video clip of a swarm that I had actually in my garden, where I had 2 queens. So you can see there where I had the big cluster, which had a queen in, and then that lovely young queen on a separate leaf. So when the colonies are ready to swarm, they don't just produce one queen. The large colony, the large swarm bundle would have the old queen, and then the new queens emerging, they would be the smaller ones. So sometimes you will have more than one queen in a swarm. And it's really amazing when you get to see this happen and experience it. And did you see how the queen was just being nursed by these other bees? And she was a lovely dark queen. So we have lovely dark bees around here. So more mixed with the Apis mellifera, which is the native black bee of Northern Europe. So less manipulation, that's the key. Minimal transportation. Let's not be putting them on trucks and traveling them, transporting them all over the place. Let the bees settle and know where they live, taking only some of the honey. Now, in my course, I talk about how we extract honey and how we do it differently. And it really is making sure that you leave a nice variety for the bees. It's not just one type of honey. You're leaving a good mixed larder full of honey. And there are alternatives to smoke. You can use sweet almond oil, you can use clearing boards, or you can use lavender water spray. Or if you just work really calmly with the bees, you might find you don't need to use anything at all. So there are lots of different types of hives, and I'll quickly go through to give you a bit of an idea. So there's a Ziegler, the National WBC, Worries, Top Bar hives, Freedom hives, Golden hives, Flow hives, Skeps, Sun hives, and these are just the ones that I have experience with for more of a naturopathic way of beekeeping, or even conventional beekeeping. There are, on top of that, so many different hives. So many countries have different varieties of hives. So put in the comments, let me know what sort of hives you use, because it'd be interesting to see how large a variety. Now, if you go to your local bee club, you'll normally be told to have a national hive. And because that is the kind of hive that everyone else uses, and the idea is then that everything is transferable. And yet, how hygienic is that, really, transferring different parts of hives? So I would really spend time, particularly if you haven't started beekeeping, to think about what is the best hive for you. Now, a Ziegler hive is as natural as you can get, and it follows the tradition of the Eastern Europeans, where they would either find or make a hole in a tree, and then they would cover it. They would make a screen on it that could be removed but strapped onto the tree, and then a separate little entrance hole for the bees to come and go. So it's a really natural, bee-friendly design. And then the trees would be marked, and a family would own that tree and own the bees that are in it. So there would be a lot of practice of handing down these trees and very carefully taking the honey. So they're not exploiting the bees. There would be a specific honey harvest season. And there are people that have Ziegler hives across the UK. And we're experimenting with one where a branch had come away from a tree. And so it had made a bit of a hollow, and so we're waiting for it to dry out and be just right for the bees. So it will often home wild bees, so the wild bees will be able to fly straight on in there and settle down. It's good for bee watching because you can just sit at the bottom of the tree and you can see the bees coming and going, and you're not getting too close, you're not interfering with their flight paths. So it's a really good way of getting started with bees, particularly if you've got woodland near you, or preferably your own woodland. And if you have trees with hollows in, you can actually work with this. It's also good for conservation. So you're actually more used in a wilding or rewilding environment, so that you're conserving bees and you're just providing a home or a space where wild bees can live. So the national and the WBC hives are probably the most commonly used in the UK. There's a hive called the Langstroth, which is a similar box design, which is the most common one in the world. But in the UK, we use the national, which is the one on the left, which is a plain box. You'll have a deep box for the brood. So that's where the queen and all the eggs and the larvae will be. And then you have shallower boxes that you put on top, which are called the supers. Now, the WBC hive is very similar, but it has an extra layer of wood that goes on the outside. These are called lifts, and they give added insulation, but also make the hive look nice. And I started with the WBC, so that was the picture you saw earlier with the WBC. And what I love about the WBCs is that if you are in an exposed area, or you have wind, or you have badgers or deer, the WBC gives the hive much better protection. If you've got a new colony in a national hive, they won't have propolized the super to the brood box or the brood box to the base. And so there's a much higher risk of the hive being knocked over or knocked across. So it's really, do consider what you're doing. And also with the national hives, and even with bought WBC hives, they're very plain wood inside, smooth wood, which is not good for the bees to attach propolis to. So you can either have the minimal insulation with the national hive, or maximum with the WBCs. And with the WBCs, you have a space between the box and the lift, which you could stuff with insulation if you wanted to, to really protect your bees. But I found the WBCs really, really good. There's the weight control. So if you do have to move or lift the boxes on your own, then you do need to think about which is easier. To move a WBC hive is not as simple or straightforward as moving a national hive. So it is considering what you are keeping bees for and what you plan to be doing. They are good for disease inspection because you have frames. You can lift the frames out and you can check whether or not the bees are healthy. But of course, that does have an impact. The costs as well depends on what type of wood and where you buy them from, but anything from £135 to £600. But again, price is often reflected with quality. So you don't want to have a hive that starts rotting while your bees are still in it. So then worry hives, these were designed to mimic more of the natural way of bees living inside trees. So it's tall and narrow so that the bees are able to do a long, thin comb. So it is really centered around the bees. What I do like about worry hives is you often have observation windows. So it's great if you start beekeeping and you have a worry hive, because you can actually remove the panels at the side and you can look inside and see what they're doing. The horizontal top bar hives, you can see in the bottom corner there, they're also very good, but they were designed for warmer climates, so more of an African beehive. So it's quite hard to get those to get through the winter months. So do consider about your location and how thick the wood is and how much insulation the bees are going to have. So you don't very often have an inspection board. So that can be a pro or a con, but I'm quite interested in having solid boards, or solid bases. So that's what they would have in the wild. So have a think about that. And there is minimal insulation. So again, they're quite often made out of different timbers. So be aware of what timber your hive's made of and how thick it is and how well insulated it would be, or how exposed the place you're going to put them is. Freedom hives, I love freedom hives. So like the one you saw me climbing up a tree. So there's your freedom hives. This one is on a stand. Again, it's based on how bees would live in the wild. So inside a tree. These are beautifully made by Matt Somerville. And so they're rough on the inside, so it enables the bees to line the inside with propolis. And propolis is the medicine that the bees collect from trees, and they mix it with the wax and they line the inside of their hive. So think of it as the bee's skin. It's what protects them. It's antiviral, antiseptic, antibacterial. It's just a wonderful substance. And yet beekeepers try and breed bees that don't produce propolis, or use hives that keep breaking the seal. And when I've used freedom hives, it's wonderful because you can see as the colony grows, they coat around their wax whatever part of the box that they're in, they'll then coat with propolis to protect themselves. They'll also make propolis curtains to go in front of the entrances. So when they're busy, the curtains are open. So like a day like today where it's sunny and warm. And then in the winter months or at the end of the summer when the wasps are after their honey, they'll actually shut the curtains to stop predators coming in. Absolutely amazing. So is comb and propolis friendly. You could add honey supers on the top, but most people have these purely for conservation and for enjoying the bees. So golden hives, these are what I use quite a lot of as well. And I found that they're really well insulated. Same idea as the top bar and even the freedom hive, but it's in a box shape with deep frames. So you have one deep frame that the bees put the brood on, the honey, the pollen, everything is stored on a frame. But along the edges, the outside edges, when they've really got strong and healthy, you'll get frames of honey, and that's when you can take some honey. So it's that good combination. But I have found that bees have overwintered in these so well. They're really strong colonies. And ours have got 4 entrances, and they, again, use propolis to open them or close them. You can have observation boards in these. Matt Somerville, again, from Be Kind Hives, he makes these. And he can make them according to your specifications if you have some special bits that you'd like tweaked, but beautifully made, beautiful quality hives. So I do love them. Flow hive, very, very controversial. Lots of people who start beekeeping think, oh, that's the hive for me because it's easy to get the honey. And that is what makes the hive brilliant. And what is nice is that the couple, father and son, Stuart and Cedar, they designed this hive after 12 years of research with their own bees to try and find a way that wasn't upsetting the bees when they took the honey. It's become very controversial because it could encourage greedy beekeepers to take all the honey and not to leave enough for the bees. Now, the original flow hives were made with Langstroth hives, and the brood box of a Langstroth is big enough for the bees to survive the winter if you leave it intact. They can normally have enough honey in there that they can get through the winter months. However, for the European market, they do make some with nationals. So you have got to be very aware of how much honey you're taking. And the honey does come from a tap. Now, I've worked with beekeepers in South Africa and Australia, where they have a warmer climate. And there, even people who are really skeptical once they've used it, they can see how bee friendly it is. But you do need to be aware that your bees need to be healthy, and you need to be sustainable and aware of how much honey you're actually taking. What I do like as well is the bees will have natural comb in the brood boxes, and that is always more healthy for the bees. And you do have observation boards. But the biggest problem in Northern Europe is the actual insulation. So the wood perhaps isn't as thick, and you have these observation windows. So it is finding a way of really making sure that the hives are good and in a safe space. But also what raised quite a lot of criticism was the use of plastic supers, because of course none of us like plastic. But as Stuart had said, he tried everything else, but to have a food safety accepted extraction system, the only thing that worked was plastic. But he is talking to different manufacturers around the world to try and find a way of improving it and not using plastic. However, what we have a problem with plastic is the throwaway plastic. It's the one-use plastics. But once these frames are inside a hive, they don't go wrong. They do last forever. Plastic does last forever. So you have to think of it in that context, just how damaging it is. However, if you are more aware about wax and the importance of wax, then there's another issue about using plastic. So Jonathan Powell, who's another founder member of the Natural Beekeeping Trust, he writes this about wax comb. So I'll read it to you. Cells have a wall thickness of just 0.07 millimeters, and they're made from over 300 different chemical components. Wax removes toxins from the honey. The resonant frequency, 230 to 270 hertz of the comb, is matched to the bee's vibration sensors, and it acts as an information highway between bees on opposite sides of the comb. So bees manage the temperature of the cell rims to optimize transmission of these messages. Wax holds history and memory via chemical signals put into it by the bees. So if you have a wax cell, you're not going to have this. If you have a plastic cell, you're not going to have the magic of the wax. But with the plastic frames in the flow hives, the bees still do add wax, but also the majority of the communication goes on in the brood box, not necessarily in the super frames. So with everything, there are pros and cons, but it's good to have an understanding of the magic of wax and why it's important that the bees do have their own wax inside a hive. But you may or may not be aware that most commercial beekeepers actually have plastic foundations in their hives, because the machinery used to extract the honey from the frames, if you had a wax foundation, they just destroy and they need replacing too quickly. But also, as they come apart, they damage the machinery. So by having a plastic frame inside. So plastic has been used inside hives for a long time. And I have become more open-minded to plastic after meeting the designer and manufacturer of plastic beehives called Appy May, and also after traveling to Cocos Keeling Island in the Indian Ocean, where it's very tropical and wood doesn't last very long. And so by having a plastic hive that can sustain real extremes in weather, so big, tropical storms and humidity, you start to see that actually perhaps a plastic on the outside is actually beneficial for the bees, because it does have a good insulation insulation properties, and inside the bees can have their own wax and they can manage a bit better. So, you know, I'm not for plastic toothbrushes or straws or spoons or flip-flops, which are what you tend to see all around the world and on the beaches. But plastic beehives, you don't see a lot of them being washed up in the ocean as yet. So then you have straw skeps or sun hives. So this is the more traditional way of keeping bees. So they've been used for thousands of years. The sun hive is a more modern version. It's using natural materials. You have that natural insulation. The bees are able to propolize the inside of the straw. So it is a lovely medium. And it's also very good to make your own skeps. They're great for catching swarms and, you know, even keeping bees. There's a wonderful beekeeper called Chris Park, who is a real bee skep making master, and he's also a beekeeper and a bee shaman, and he is very, very interesting. And you know, if you ever get to see his talks or go and join one of his courses, then I highly recommend it. So honey can be extracted, but it's not so easy. But more and more people are putting bell jars and things on top of the skep, or doing a second skep that can be worked as a super. So they're not, you don't have to kill the bees to get the honey, but we use them more for conservation. So we use them for bees to rest in, to actually, you know, build up their own strength and immunity. And then when they swarm, those swarms will go into normal hives, or we'll capture them and put them into normal hives that we can perhaps use for honey production if need be. So they are tricky for disease checks because the wax comb is attached to all the straw inside. You can't inspect each individual comb or frame. However, you get a good idea from looking at the outside just how healthy your bees are. So I really recommend that you keep an eye on the bees from the outside so that you don't let them get to a really sick state. Where to place a hive, it's so important. You need to think about your garden and your neighbours. You know, how much space have you got? What direction are the bees flying in? Swarming. Something people don't often think about is that they've already got native bees in their garden, but because you're not taking honey from them, you might not be looking at them. So you'll have the bumblebees, you'll have all kinds of different bees. And when you put a colony of bees in, you're introducing 50,000 more hungry mouths. So this is why I don't advocate buying bees. Get a hive, an empty hive, put it in your garden and bait it so that the native local bees, when they swarm, they'll move into your hive. And that is the most sustainable way to get started with beekeeping. So it's being aware of swarms, making friends with your local beekeeper or your swarm collector, so that if they have some bees going spare, then you can work with them. Really good in allotments, but again, you've got to be careful of your neighbours. Orchards are great, but of course, bear in mind, do the orchards that you're putting your bees in, do they use chemicals? Do they use fungicides or herbicides? And is there anything else flowering there? Because orchards only bloom for a few weeks each year, and bees need feeding all year round. So an orchard with lovely trees and big rich hedges, and with a meadow underground of all wild, or underplanted with all wild flowers, that will be perfect. But an orchard which is heavily sprayed, with all the weeds killed underneath the trees, and with carefully trimmed hedges or even wooden fences, is not going to be any good for your bees. So finding bees, so as I said, swarms, that's the best place. I do believe that bees choose the keeper, and beekeepers choose other beekeepers. So it's important to know who your local beekeepers are, and when you build up these relationships and friendships, and if you help a beekeeper, then they'll help you. So it's really good to be involved with these communities. Even if you have different opinions on how you keep your bees, it's still important to have those connections and to work together, because not everyone can collect a swarm or even wants to collect a swarm. And some people collect loads of swarms but don't have the space for them. So it's really good to work together in communities. So you could buy a nucleus. Again, I wouldn't recommend buying it from outside of your area, but you might have a local beekeeper who produces nuclei. So he'll be splitting his colonies early in the spring and building up colonies ready to sell on. So that's a good way of getting started. Swarms, you can collect your own swarms. You can bait a hive so a swarm will move straight in. And splits, if you've already got one colony, you could split it early in the spring and then you'll have two. So it's, again, understanding a bit about beekeeping and how you can find your bees. And how much time, people say, oh, how much time does it take to keep bees? If you're wondering about that, then you're not ready to keep bees. Bees, you want to spend time with them, but bear in mind that the busy time for bees is April until end of July, August. And then you're preparing for the winter. So just if you've got bees in your garden, it would be irresponsible for you to not be around through the summer months. So we've now rearranged our whole schedule so that if we're going to go away, it's outside of those bee months. So between April and July, I know that I'm going to be at home, I'm going to be around for my bees and just there ready for them when they need me. But things like catching a swarm, you'll catch a swarm, which could be quite urgent. But then once you're waiting for them to all go into the skep, you've got a few hours. So you could spend quite a lot of time, like my mentor here, Chris, standing just watching bees as they go into a hive or into a skep. So the conventional is more time because you're opening up the hive every week. Natural is less time, but you might actually find you're spending as much or more time because you're sitting outside watching your bees more. You're more aware of what the bees are doing instead of that mad dash, oh, I've got to go and open up the hive. You're actually looking at them for a little bit every day. Wild bees, they can get on with it themselves. You don't need to be doing much. You can just have them up in the tree and watching them and just keeping a note of when they're busy, when they're not, what they're feeding on, and when they're quiet. So then you have an idea of how long they can survive in a tree. If a tree hollow isn't very big and if the winters are difficult, then the bees might not be able to have enough room inside a tree to store enough honey to get them through the winter. So you'll learn all this from observation. To feed or not to feed. So this is the composition of honey. So you can see it's this mixture of fructose, glucose, water, maltose, higher carbohydrates, sucrose, and the trace elements, the 0.5%, is the really important bits. It's the minerals, the vitamins, and the enzymes. So there's really important gut enzymes that the bees add to the honey when they're producing it. So that's what honey is, and that is so different to a plain white sugar that is just glucose. And the thing is, it's that balance, it's those balance, and different plants have different balances of the fructose, glucose, maltose, and sucrose. They all change. Every different plant variety produces a different type of honey. So those of you in my honey club, and you've seen the different types of honey already, you know, there are so many different honeys, and they really do depend on the soil and the environment and the plant's purpose, what the plant is trying to produce. So that is so very, very different to a white sugar fondant. So honey is defined as the natural sweet substance which is produced by Apis mellifera bees from the nectar of plants or the secretions of living parts of plants or secretions of plant-sucking insects. So the last bit is referring to honeydew honey, which is where the bees feed off the secretions of aphids, normally on trees, and that produces a really delicious, rich, syrupy honey, very much like molasses. But honey is also produced from the other honey bees around the world. So there's 11 different species of bees. It's not just Apis mellifera. You have Apis florea, you have Apis dorsata, Apis laboriosa. Then there's the stingless bees, a wide family of bees all across Asia and South America. So there are so many different types of bees that also produce honey. So it's not just Apis mellifera. And then planting for bees. You need to be sure that your bees have food throughout the year. So those of you who did my challenge, it was really great to see that you took care to see what plants you've got in your garden. What is it you're planting around for the bees? What are they going to feed on throughout the year? It's just so important. And different plants produce different things for the bees. So the snowdrops early in the spring, they're really important for the pollen. So the bees need that pollen to help their brood grow. Dandelions are wonderful because they have the mixture of nectar and pollen all in one flower head. You know, there's thousands of little flowers or hundreds of little flowers in one little spot. So just when it's still a bit chilly for the bees to be flying far distances, they can actually get a good mixture of what they need just from one flower. And then you have the ivy on the left, which is, it's a mixed blessing. Scientists have found that bees won't actually go on ivy honey if they've been left their honey. But if bees have had their honey harvested and been replaced with sugar, then they will feed on the ivy honey. But ivy it flowers late in the summer, so it is important. So if we've had a bad summer and the bees are still needing to collect stores, then ivy is really important. But it takes 15 years before an ivy plant will flower. So really have a look at the ivy in your area and just realize that every time you cut it back, you can be delaying the flowering. And so there are also ways you might think, oh, I've got to keep bees, that's how I can save the bees. But there's plenty of ways you can help the bees without keeping them. The most important thing, buy, eat, or grow organic food. That is the best thing you can do because that will change agriculture. Chemical food is only sold in shops because we buy it. If we stop buying it, then they'll stop producing it. It might take a little while, but why not? We have the power of the pound, the power of the dollar. Just use the power you've got. Every decision you make with what you buy has an impact. And if you want to do one thing to save the bees, just start buying organic food or growing your own. And it doesn't have to be certified organic, just chemical free. Just make sure it's chemically free. We all have local farmers. Wherever you are in Britain, there's going to be somebody just down the road who's growing something that would be just right for you. So support them. There's no point in buying food that's traveled all around the world, and it might well be organic, but then it's sprayed with all kinds of chemicals just to keep it looking fresh or to enable it to be transported. So try and eat local, and buy and eat seasonal food. Stop using chemicals. Stop using them in your flower baskets, in your flower beds. Just because you're not eating the food doesn't mean someone else isn't. And the bees, they're feeding on the nectar. And if you put chemicals on those flowers or even on the soil, it's going to come up in the nectar for the bees. And there's so much science that shows that these chemicals are killing the bees. And something I want to ask you is, if the chemicals that we're putting on our food is killing the bees, what kind of effect is it having on those who eat the food that is being sprayed? Just have a think about that. So educate yourself and others. Really look into what food has chemicals and what chemicals are and what they're being used on and for. So the systemic pesticides, where the diagram here is showing a sunflower, they actually make every part of the plant toxic, and that's where you have a seed coating. Now, quite a lot of plants that you'll buy to put in your garden are treated with these systemic pesticides. So you'll think you're buying something that's going to be bee friendly, but in actual fact, when they did tests on a lot of bee friendly plants, even RHS plants, they found they weren't bee friendly at all because they've been treated with these pesticides. So really ask the questions and make sure, just keep checking that when you're buying seeds or you're buying plants, that they haven't been treated with these chemicals, because it's become so accepted and so widespread that we just presume that things wouldn't have chemicals on, when in actual fact they do. And it's the power of your purchases. So just don't forget that. There's 7 billion of us on the planet, and we really do have the power. So what you buy will influence things. And I know that not everyone can afford to buy organic food, but if you can, I feel it's your duty to do that, because in turn that will bring the prices down and then enable more people to be buying organic food. And if you are buying organic food for yourself, then support others by putting organic food in the food bank boxes. Let's share the love, let's share the good quality food, because if it's chemical food, it can't be doing us much good. So how can I help you? How can we and my bee team, how do we help you? Well, we do management and we take care of your own hives. So if you want to have hives, but you haven't got time, or you're terrified or whatever, or you want to see how to do it, then we can do that for you. We also do swarm collection and housing of bees. So if you've got bees in a place that you don't want them anymore, then we can try and help you rehouse the bees. We do consultancy. So I consult for honey companies, businesses, farms, hotels, visitor attractions, anyone who wants to know more about bees or how they can help their visitor experience or their hotel guests, or even in the restaurants with chefs if you want to have more knowledge about honeys. So my work as a honey sommelier, I can really help source really good quality honeys and single variety honeys that I know are sustainably produced. So I have this connection with all kinds of honey suppliers and distributors and industry experts. So it's great network. And when you start getting into beekeeping and you find your passion and your little niche, it's amazing how you then can connect with people all around the world. So if you want to find who's the best doctor on propolis, then I can send you straight to Dr. Stefan Stefaniou, who Romanian specialist on propolis. And then in the UK we have Lucia Barkley. So there's people that I know, and I love connecting people who are interested in helping the bees. So, and also I have my online naturopathic beekeeping course. So as more and more people were asking me, how do I keep the bees? How do I keep them in a more natural way, or becoming upset with how bees were being kept or being taught to keep them on the more conventional courses? So that's why I set up my course. And last year, because everything had to go online, I moved my course online. So the course is advice on hives, finding your bees and where you can place them. If you're already a beekeeper and you're thinking, well, I've been doing all this chemical stuff and I'm not comfortable with it anymore, I've been using smoke and I haven't quite got the confidence to move away from smoke, I can help you with that. So I can help people do that transition. I can also help with the care and management of pests and diseases. So on the course, you'll actually learn about pests and diseases, because it is important. You do need to know when your bees are sick or suffering. And also we talk about different products from the hive. So how you can extract honey, how you can prepare honey, what the regulations are, how you bottle it, where you can sell it. And then also a month by month guide to bee care. So there's all these things that we can cover with the bee course. So by the end of it, you've got an amazing portfolio of information, so you know what to do next. So here we go. Here are the winners for my challenge. So the first prize, who gets a free place on my course, is Sarah Bolter Griffin. So well done, Sarah. You were really good with all your comments. And to double check, she'd actually emailed me photo images of all of her results as well, all of her comments. So she was certainly not to be missed. So yeah, really great. Lovely to hear what you're doing for the bees. And then Pauline, well done, Pauline. So you've won a free skep making course. And Sam, you have won the signed book bundle. So I've got 2 books, Artist to Bees and Bees in Bhutan. And so you'll have a copy of each of them sent away to you. So I will contact you all with details on how to access your courses. Now, those of you who didn't win, I'm so sorry. We put you all in a hat and shook it up and pulled out the names, which was really fun to do. So I'm really sorry if you didn't win. I would love to give you all the course, and I hate that I just can't give it all away. But it has taken me a long time to put together the courses, to get all the tech right, and to actually learn all this information that I'm sharing with you. So I do have to sell my courses. Now, normally my course is £347. And it includes a weekly live session. But what I have done for July, because I wouldn't normally run a course at this time of year, because I am busy with the bees, and also because so many people are wanting to know about bees now, because you're seeing bees and you're wanting to understand the bees. So I thought what I'd do instead is I would run this course through July. You'll get immediate access if you buy it, but through July. And you will have access to the pre-recorded or the re-recordings of all the previous courses that I've done. So you'll get access to all the lessons, all the modules, and you can watch the previous course. So all the live sessions that we did, you can watch those, and you can still do the quizzes, and you'll still get a certificate at the end of it. So because you're not getting the live session with me, you will then have an amazing opportunity to get a good saving. So you're going to save £200. So for today and until the 30th of June, I'm offering the course at £147. So it means that you can get straight on there. You can do it at your own pace, but I will be there to answer questions. So if you've got questions while you're doing the course, there's comments and I will answer them. I go in there and answer them. Now, if you really want to top that up and have a one-to-one session with me after you've done the course, where I can help you with any questions you've got or guide you towards where you need to go next, then I do have a top-up VIP session as well. So I'm going to have details for that when I come off and do the questions. So I've got this little list here of recommended books and resources. So there's my book, A to Bees, where I have 50 chapters, all little short chapters, and it's all about how bees came into my life and also how I set up with bees at the Newt in Somerset. So that's a really interesting read, and I talk about the illness, and I talk about travels in Oman, Italy, South Africa. And in my book, Bees of Bhutan, I talk about the trip to Bhutan and what I learned about bees there. So Joe Bleasdale, he's one of my bee team, and he has written a book called Beekeeping with No Fuss and No Chemicals. So he's one of the original treatment-free beekeepers, and his bees have actually been used in the research by Steve Martin at Sheffield University on how bees survive or treat themselves with varroa, so about the uncapping and capping of cells. So they needed his bees to find bees that are successfully varroa free. So I'm really honoured to have Joe as part of my bee team. And then one of my heroines is Jacqueline Freeman, so The Song of Increase, where she's a biodynamic beekeeper and farmer in Portland, Oregon. So really, really wonderful book. And then Bee Time, Mark Winston is a wonderful scientist, and he started off his journey with bees with the Africanized bee in South America. So he's really interested in, or really interesting on how he's come with his journey. And he's done a lot of research on the chemical effects of bees as well. So although he started off as a real fighting with some pretty feisty bees, he's really done well. Then there's The Book of Bees by Piotr Soka. It's an amazing children's book, but great. And if you are anywhere near me in Galhampton, I actually have some of these books available in my little workshop here, so you can always come and buy some of the books. So Tom Seeley, lots of books by Tom Seeley. So Honeybee Democracy I've listed there, but The Lives of Bees is his most recent book, and that covers how he studied the wild bees. So it's really understanding how bees get over diseases and pests and things, but in a natural way. So thank you very much. And I'm going to come out of the shared screen, if I can, and then we can share, or I can ask any, you can ask me any questions. So here we go. I might have to put my glasses on, I'm afraid. So let me just put my specs on, because I can see we've got some comments. Oh, great, wonderful, Pauline, Sam, thank you. Oh, Dadance hives, Olga, wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to put the link for the course is just along the bottom there, and I will put it in the comments. Oh, actually, I've just put, that's the link there for the VIP one. And we should have another link, which will be, so great. Has anybody got any questions? I'm glad you're going to do the course. So 2 weeks. So Sam has only had her bees for 2 weeks. Oh, gosh, very new beekeeper, but how exciting, how exciting. And it's so lovely when you get to see your bees flying and you get to see them throughout the year. Wonderful. And Pauline, so you're in Ireland. Great. Now that is a real beekeeping centre. That's just amazing. People love their bees in Ireland. So a really great place to be. So I am just going to find the link to add in the group, in the chat, so that you can then, I wish I could say talk amongst yourselves. Actually, I think what I'll do is I will do this. So I'll just copy that link. There we go. So there we go. That link's back there, and I'm going to add the link in the chat. There we go. Oh, so Pauline says she never wins anything. Well, you did today. So well done. I'm really pleased for you. And it's so exciting. And I'm so sorry for those of you who didn't win. And if you watch on Instagram, we actually put all the names in a skep and shook them all up. And then I just pulled them out one at a time. So, yeah. Really sorry. It breaks my heart when I know that there are some people who really want to do the course and really want to know more, but obviously it doesn't always work that way. And I've entered so many competitions and haven't won them before, so I know how upsetting it is when you don't win and when you really want to win. So there we go. So here we are. I've finished everything I wanted to talk about today. So gives you an idea about naturopathic beekeeping, why I think it's so important and what we can learn from the bees. And I really hope that you've been inspired to really think about how you keep bees and how you can take care of them in a more natural way, because I think we do need the bees. They are trying to tell us something. And this one little nugget that I learned from Bhutan was the Buddhist monks believe that the highest level of reincarnation is as a bee. So if you imagine that the bees that we're all being called to listen to and to learn from are containing the wisdom of these lamas with thousands of years of knowledge and wisdom, and the bees now, they've come to us and they're calling us all to take care of them and to listen. And that's what I do more than anything, is I listen and I learn from the bees. And so what I'm sharing with you is what I've experienced and what I feel the bees are wanting us all to know. So I hope that you've enjoyed today. I hope that you have bees in your life and that bees in your life are really strong and happy and healthy, and that you have a great summer. And may it be sunny from now on and the bees be swarming and showing how healthy they are. So thank you very much to all of you who stuck through, and thank you to those of you watching on the replay, and I look forward to seeing you on the course. So thank you very much. Bye for now.